They came not as conquerors, but as settlers, armed with ships, knowledge, and memory. The Greeks who arrived in Italy did not drift westward by chance. Their expansion was planned, purposeful, driven by pressure at home and opportunity abroad. In the 8th century BCE, the great city-states of the Aegean, Chalcis, Corinth, Rhodes, and later Athens, sent out waves of colonists across the seas. They founded new cities on foreign shores, not as outposts of empire, but as independent offspring, apoikiai. These were not camps. They were cities, with temples, agoras, laws, and walls. Their settlements took root in the fertile lowlands and harbors of southern Italy and Sicily, a region the Romans would later call Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. Mommsen emphasizes that the arrival of the Greeks in Italy marked a civilizational threshold. For the first time, the Italic world was confronted with a literate, urban, maritime culture, already ancient in its institutions and expansive in its vision. The Greeks brought coinage, monumental architecture, metallurgy, and the alphabet, tools that would shape the peninsula's future in ways the Etruscans alone could not. Their first known foothold was Cumae, settled by Chalcidians in Campania. From there, colonization moved both south and east. Sybaris rose in Lucania, famed for its opulence. Croton became a center of athletics and healing. Tarentum, founded by Spartans, stood apart, militarized, proud, aggressive. Neapolis, new city, stood beside the old, absorbing and then surpassing it in influence. Each colony acted autonomously. There was no overarching Greek administration, but each one carried with it the ideals and aesthetics of Hellas, its myths, its dialects, its gods. Their temples rose over Italic plains, their coins passed through Etruscan hands, their wine flowed inland along trade routes that cut across the peninsula. The Greeks in Italy were not alone. They encountered Oscans, Lacanians, Samnites, and eventually Romans. But where Italic tribes moved with custom and kinship, the Greeks moved with the machinery of the polis. Their institutions, however fragmented, were sharper, more formal, and in time, more seductive. Mommsen sees this not merely as colonization, but as the westward transplanting of the Mediterranean's most sophisticated political experiment. It would not survive untouched, but it would leave its mark, etched into the soil long before Rome reached the sea. The Greeks did not simply arrive, they radiated. Mommsen underscores that the influence of the Greek colonies extended well beyond their fortified walls. Contact between Greeks and the native Italic populations, Oscans, Lacanians, Samnites, and even Etruscans, set in motion a cultural transformation that would echo across centuries. The Italic world, tribal and fragmented, met a civilization of structured order, written law, and codified religion. First came the visual signs. Italic pottery, once simple and utilitarian, began to reflect Hellenic styles, figures in motion, mythological themes, decorative balance. Architecture followed. Italic temples grew in size and form, borrowing not just technique, but sacred vocabulary. The stylobate, the column, the pediment. Then came the gods. Native deities were renamed, reshaped, and repurposed under Greek models. Where once local spirits guarded streams and groves, now Apollo and Dionysus walked the hills. Mythologies bled together. Oracles appeared. Rituals once grounded in tribal memory were reframed through Hellenic logic and narrative. But the most enduring transmission was the alphabet. The Greek script, adapted from Phoenician roots, passed first through Etruria and then into Latium. It gave Rome its letters. It gave law its form. Without Greek colonization, Latin literacy, Rome's defining administrative tool, would have taken an entirely different shape, or none at all. Mommsen highlights that this influence was strongest along the coastlines and trade routes. Inland, in the mountains and uplands, older customs held firm. There, Greek culture was a rumor or a borrowed luxury, not yet an organizing force. And still, the transformation was underway. Italic art began to depict Hercules instead of local champions. Etruscan tombs filled with Greek faces. Coins minted in italic cities bore Greek inscriptions and symbols. Even the practice of coinage itself, foreign to tribal economies, was introduced through Greek hands. This was not domination. It was diffusion, a steady, compelling current that moved through trade, war, marriage, and imitation. The Greeks brought no empire, but their presence created a gravitational pull. The Italic peoples began to orbit it, consciously or not. Mommsen sees this influence not as imitation, but as absorption with transformation. The Italic world did not become Greek, but it ceased to be sealed. They brought not only ships and gods, but law. The Greek colonies in Italy were not dependencies of their mother cities. They were born with autonomy. Each was an independent polis, a political organism complete with its own institutions, citizen assemblies, magistrates, and sacred cults. Mommsen stresses this from the outset. These were not trading posts, but full civic entities, cities with a constitutional core. At the head of each new settlement stood the oikistes, the founder. Chosen by the mother city and revered as a hero after death, he did more than establish the site. He anchored its laws and cults. From that first moment, the colony was sovereign in action, even if symbolic ties to the metropolis remained. The political arrangements varied. Some were aristocratic, ruled by elite councils drawn from the founding families. Others evolved into tyrannies or opened their assemblies to broader citizen participation. But all shared the Hellenic model, the idea that governance was a matter of structure, of law, of civic debate, not merely bloodline or divine favor. This political form did not exist in isolation. Greek colonies often found themselves surrounded by indigenous tribes who had no comparable systems. While Italic peoples organized around kinship groups and clan authority, the Greek colonies rotated magistrates, held public deliberations, and encoded their laws in writing. They conducted diplomacy as states, not as tribes. Mommsen points to the irony. The most sophisticated cities in southern Italy were not Roman, not even Italic. They were Greek. Tarentum, Sybaris, Croton, Rhegium. Each had urban planning, coinage, naval power, and codified laws before Rome had finished draining its marshes. But there was a flaw. These city-states, like their counterparts in the Aegean, were fractious. They quarreled, competed, turned on one another. Their independence, though noble in principle, left them divided in practice. Rivalry undermined solidarity. And in time, their internal instability made them vulnerable, first to Italic pressures from inland, then to the expansion of Rome itself. Mommsen does not romanticize these colonies. He respects their brilliance, but he records their limits. Their political model was advanced, but it was not adaptable enough to form lasting federations. It could build institutions, but not coalitions. And in a world where power was shifting from the coast to the interior, that failure would cost them everything. The earliest Romans viewed the Greeks with suspicion, even disdain. Their luxuries, their rhetoric, their art seemed effeminate to a people hardened by labor and law. Yet beneath that posture of distance, Roman culture was absorbing something deeper: structural models, conceptual frameworks, and aesthetic modes that would outlast prejudice. Mommsen is unequivocal. No civilization influenced Rome more profoundly than Greece. The first and most fundamental transmission was linguistic. Through Etruscan mediation, the Roman alphabet took shape from Greek letters. But this was not mere phonetic borrowing. The very act of writing, of fixing law, history, and contract in permanent form, was a Greek habit that Rome adopted and intensified. Religious life, too, was transformed. Italic gods began to wear Greek names. Indigenous cults were reframed through Hellenic myth. Roman Jupiter absorbed traits of Zeus. Diana took on Artemis's form. The Lectisternium, a public banquet of the gods, entered Roman ritual from Greek precedent. Even the Sibylline books, consulted in times of crisis, were written in Greek. Political theory entered more gradually. The Greek polis offered models of civic structure, offices with term limits, deliberative assemblies, public oratory. Rome did not copy these forms outright, but it did encode their logic into its republic. The idea of public debate, of contested authority, of law over lineage, these found precedent in the Hellenic world. Then came the arts. Roman sculpture, once rigid and symbolic, began to mimic Greek realism. Poets like Ennius wrote in Latin hexameter modeled on Homer. Theodor emerged in Rome not from native impulse, but from Greek dramatic form, translated and staged for new audiences. Yet what Mommsen observes is not imitation, but transformation. Rome did not become Greek. It used Greek culture as a resource, selectively, strategically. It adopted the structure but stripped it of excess. It revered Greek philosophy, but embedded it within Roman moral discipline. It honored Greek form, but gave it Roman utility. The Greek colonies in Italy were the first conduits of this transfer. From Cumae and Tarentum, through Etruria and Campania, Greek knowledge passed into Roman hands, not all at once, and not always by invitation. But when the Republic rose to power, it stood on a foundation already laid by others, a scaffolding of ideas shaped in marble, written in Greek, and reassembled in Latin. We'd love to hear your thoughts on possible future topics. What areas of human evolution would you like to explore next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. As always, our references and further reading are listed in the description below if you'd like to dive deeper into the subject. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.